Welcome back to the deep dive. You hand us the core documents, all the complexity, the sheer volume, and we drill down to the critical requirements that will, actually make or break the project. Today, we are taking a deep dive into procurement and subcontracting. Specifically, we're analyzing the very stringent core requirements laid out in the employer requirement document E2.4 for a major capital project. And this document, it doesn't just ask the contractor to buy things.
No, not at all. It forces them to take total accountability for the entire supply chain, the whole logistics operation.
But the scope is just, it's staggering. Demands mastery over everything from the very start, the initial pre-qualification of vendors, through really intensive technical inspection and testing, all the way to these complex logistics like expediting, detail packing, clearing customs.
Right, securing transportation, delivering it safely to the site. It's an entire instruction manual for managing risk, really.
It really is.
And if you look at the sort of mission statement of this section, it is completely focused on preemptive risk mitigation. And for this deep dive, we should probably clarify our terms.
Good point.
See, the document talks about suppliers for plant and materials, but you have to remember that every system they build has to handle both goods and contracted services.
So a supplier can also be a subcontractor.
Exactly, under the general conditions of contract, absolutely. The employer's primary goal here is really to install a kind of financial and quality firewall.
Firewall, like that.
Yeah, they want assurance that all the plant and materials are properly tested, that they're defect-free and fully compliant before they even think about leaving the factory floor.
And they enforce that with, a pre-qualification process.
A very rigorous one.
Yeah.
They make sure vendors have proven experience, the right technical capability, production capacity, and critically verifiable financial stability. No shaky hands on this project.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're talking about massive, detailed systems that have to be in place before a single purchase order is even cut.
That's right.
So the foundation starts with the procurement plan, which is a crucial part of the overall project execution plan, or PEP. And this plan isn't just a calendar, is it? It's more like the legal blueprint for standardization.
That's a good way to put it. It has to contain standard forms, standard procedures for literally everything.
Like what?
Well, how progress control and reporting will happen, how they'll execute expediting both from the home office and physically at the manufacturer's site, and then how they navigate customs, import formalities, and the exact procedures for warranty control and, later on, defects correction. It's about standardizing the chaos of a global supply chain.
Right. And what ties all that together?
The unifying technology. That's the Plant and Materials Management System, the PMMS.
The PMMS.
And what's really fascinating here is its span of control. Just think of the PMMS as a digital passport for every single piece of equipment.
A digital passport.
Okay, it tracks an item not just from the purchase order date, but from the absolute moment the need is identified by the engineering team.
So way earlier than you'd think.
Way earlier. It follows that item through the entire procurement cycle, through manufacturing, inspection, shipping, and keeps tracking it right until the moment it's released from the site warehouse for installation into the works.
Wow. And to manage that across continents and different manufacturers, the system has to be.
It has to be automated. It has to be accessible to the contractor, all their subcontractors, and the core suppliers. It's a shared source of truth.
That's a huge requirement.
Yeah.
You're forcing the contractor to implement this auditable inventory management system before they've even signed the contract.
Pretty much.
So if the PMMS handles the physical goods, what's the mirror system for services?
That would be the Subcontracting Plan and its own dedicated Subcontract Management System, or SMS.
Ah, okay, the SMS.
Yep. And just like the PMMS, it covers the entire life cycle, but for contracted services. It tracks the process from identifying the need for a subcontract, say, for a specialized hydro testing team, all the way through the tendering cycle to the final completion and sign-off of that service contract.
So the same level of diligence, whether you're buying a pump or buying construction labor.
Identical. The diligence is absolutely identical.
Okay, so let's move from the planning to the execution. Let's talk about requisitioning the actual act of ordering. The contractor has to use standard approved forms. That sounds basic, but I imagine it prevents a lot of headaches later on.
It does. But here's a critical little nugget in there, probably built on decades of project reality.
No.
The contractor is specifically required to order sufficient surplus plant and materials.
Sufficient surplus. So that's not just optional padding.
No, it's a specific mandate. It's to cater for expected shortage, loss, pilferage, and those minor design changes that always happen late in the game.
And that one rule probably prevents that classic horror story, right? The multi-million-dollar installation just sitting there idle because they're short on a few hundred special bolts.
That's exactly what it's for.
Yeah.
Then, once the need is established, the real technical work begins in the tender phase, and the analysis required goes way beyond just the price. The contractor has to analyze tenders in depth, focusing on two critical mandated factors.
And the first one is?
First, they have to perform a total lifecycle costs analysis, a TLC analysis.
So, looking beyond the sticker price.
Far beyond. You're comparing bidders based on estimated energy use, long-term maintenance needs, predicted lifespan, disposal costs. You know, the difference between a $50,000 pump and a $60,000 pump might be millions in operating costs over 20 years. The employer wants that long-term view.
And the second factor?
Ensuring the plant and materials are absolutely fit for purpose.
Which sounds obvious, but I'm guessing there's more to it.
There is. It means the contractor has to prove the chosen material doesn't just meet the specs on paper, but that it's optimized for the actual operating conditions, the interfaces, the safety requirements of the specific facility they're building.
And both of those analyses have to be submitted before the contract is awarded.
For critical items, yes. They go to the employer for review and approval first.
And this is where the system becomes the ultimate management tool. We're talking procurement control and the mandatory criticality rating.
Yes. The contractor has to formally identify the criticality for every single tagged item and every major bulk material requisition. This isn't just good practice. It is a non-negotiable step.
And that criticality report is what directs everyone's attention.
It's the engine, really. It directs the employer's attention and the contractor's resources. The document requires distinguishing at least 4 levels of criticality.
4 levels.
Yeah.
And these are tied to the consequences of failure.
Directly. A level 4 item might be a main compressor. Its failure or late delivery stops the entire project, risks a major safety incident, and compromises reliability for years.
And a level 1 item.
That could be standard structural bolts. A shortage is a hassle, sure, but it doesn't halt the entire time for completion. This rating then dictates the intensity of inspection, the frequency of expediting visits, everything.
And the tracking needed for this is, well, it's the real benchmark for performance, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The source document has a typical procurement planning format. It tracks a pump, PO001, for example, and it maps out every milestone. Requisition approved, purchase order award, start production.
The FAT, the factory acceptance test.
Right, the FAT.
Yeah.
And the required at site date, the RAS.
But the real accountability mechanism is in the reporting.
Reporting. For every single one of those steps, they track the plan date, the actual date, the forecast date, and the most telling one, the forecast delta days.
Ah, the delta.
That delta is how far off schedule they expect to be. This rigorous, often automated detail is delivered monthly in the progress report. You just can't hide slippage when that delta is staring everyone in the face.
And that intense tracking flows right into expediting, which has to be diligent, staffed by dedicated people. If those delta days start turning red,
then the obligations get serious.
Very serious. If the contractor anticipates any delay, they must immediately take, and this is the direct language, adequate measures to recover this anticipated delay.
Extraordinary measures, the employer calls them.
They do. It means they can't just shrug. They have to spend extra money, pull extra shifts, maybe use air freight instead of sea freight, and they have to inform the employer immediately about those specific costly recovery steps.
So rescheduling is the last resort.
The absolute last resort. Only if a delay is truly unavoidable can they submit a proposal to modify the overall program. Accountability is on recovery first.
Okay, let's move beyond the factory floor. Let's talk about logistics services, where financial and physical risk really meet. This is so much more than just booking a container. The contractor has to establish detailed packing instructions.
Which can be highly specialized for climate or handling.
Right. And they have to coordinate mandatory pre-shipment inspections, handle all the complex paperwork for import-export licenses.
Even when those licenses are officially in the employer's name.
Right.
And the physical responsibility is just astounding. For any special or extra large cargoes, massive reactor vessels or turbines, the contractor must arrange route surveys and secure permits.
Meaning they have to literally map the physical route from the port to the site.
Exactly. Checking for low bridges, sharp turns, road weight limits, and getting all the necessary government permits to move that oversized equipment. It just shows the depth of responsibility.
And on top of that, they have to provide reports on all the shipments, vessel names, arrival dates, cargo descriptions.
The paper trail has to be perfect.
Which brings us to the final financial layer, VAT and customs.
Ah, yes. This is that financial firewall we talked about. It places full liability on the contractor.
So they have to ensure all VAT and customs regulations are met.
Strictly met. And crucially, the document says they must assure that these duties will not give rise for a claim for costs to the employer.
That is the core of the financial risk transfer right there.
It is. The contractor is completely responsible for declaring goods, paying duties and taxes, and importantly, they must use things like customs suspension regimes, temporary importation, for instance, to manage that cost burden without ever passing it back.
So if they fail, if the paperwork's wrong,
the contractor absorbs the penalties and the duties. It's their problem, not the employer's, and that can be millions easily.
Okay, so now let's switch gears a bit. From procuring goods to managing large-scale services and construction work through the subcontracting plan.
Right.
And just like the procurement side, this plan requires detailed procedures. But the focus here seems to shift more to contractual risk.
It's all about flow down. A key requirement is the list of back-to-back provisions.
Back-to-back, meaning?
Meaning the contractor has to identify all the key terms, conditions, performance requirements from the main contract and make sure they are systematically flowed down into the subcontract terms. It's how you ensure accountability all the way down the chain.
A mechanism for risk distribution.
Exactly. And when you look at the deliverables for subcontracting, the plan needs a detailed scope matrix and pricing type.
And the examples they give for subcontracts are pretty broad. Soil investigation, site security, heavy lifting, hydro testing.
Waste management. It underscores that we're not just talking about the big civil works. It's everything from niche technical services to basic site support, and the quality management has to cover it all.
In the selection process for all these key players, suppliers, vendors, subcontractors, it's very tightly controlled.
It is. The contractor pre-qualifies, selects, and appoints them, but they can't do it in the black box. They have to give the employer the full list of approved firms and also the ones they're still considering.
Which connects to the bigger picture of quality control because the employer has the right to step in.
A direct right. The employer can participate in meetings between the contractor and any proposed suppliers or subcontractors. This isn't just reading reports. It's active engagement to protect the long-term health of the asset.
And there was one other strategic requirement in there about market conditions.
Yes, specifically mentioning the Netherlands and Europe. It says if there's concurrent construction work at the site, the contractor has to develop a subcontracting strategy that anticipates and mitigates potential conflicts.
Like labor shortages or wage inflation.
Exactly. Or even physical site conflicts. It forces them to look beyond their own little bubble and consider the wider regional industrial environment.
So after all this, what does it all mean for someone listening in, a project manager, or just a curious learner? I think the key takeaway from this deep dive is pretty clear. Large-scale procurement and subcontracting isn't an administrative function. It's a dedicated, very sophisticated risk management discipline.
I'd agree with that.
Every single step, from checking a vendor's finances to setting the criticality of a pump to managing customs duties, it's all governed by these robust, trackable, and compliant management systems. The goal is total accountability.
Right. So the employer never has to worry about cost, schedule, or quality risks coming from the supply chain.
Exactly.
And that leads us to a final provocative thought for you to consider. Given the absolute mandate for the contractor to analyze bids based on total life cycle costs looking decades into the future, how might that long-term perspective ultimately force innovation in manufacturing and technical specification?
That's interesting.
Well, think about it. If the cheapest initial product is guaranteed to fail the TCO analysis because of high energy use or costly maintenance, what specific, detailed, reliable data, beyond a simple price quote, must you, the owner, demand from a supplier to make that analysis truly effective?
So the requirement is one thing, but getting the data to fulfill it is the real challenge.
It's the real challenge, and it's the real power shift.
Food for thought until the next deep dive. Thanks for tuning in.
If you're interested in the templates, please visit our shop. The link is in the description.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.